Welcome back to the Ancient Art of Modern Warfare. I'm Chris Mayer, Colonel, U.S. Cavalry retired, and in this series I attempt to explain the enduring philosophy of war, as it was, as it is, and will continue to be, regardless of advances in weaponry or politics. The first 100 or so episodes of this series laid the basis of that enduring art of war, citing modern examples of application. Now I'm turning that around to look at modern events and attempt to explain them within that enduring context. It has been a while since I last posted. Some of you know that my avocation is flying and that I own, fly, and display a former U.S. Air Force reconnaissance airplane. Summer is air show season, and this year required a lot more of my time and energy to get the plane ready for the season. The work is never done, but at least I have some breathing room now to start back on these podcasts. On August 10th, 2025, Pope Leo XIV said, "Let us continue to pray for an end to wars." The 80th anniversary of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki has reawakened throughout the world the necessary rejection of war as a means of resolving conflicts. May those who make decisions always keep in mind their responsibility for the consequences of their choices on the lives of people. May they not ignore the needs of the weakest and the universal desire for peace. It may not seem so at first, but this thought is directly relevant to the ancient art of modern warfare. Pope Leo notes that conflict exists apart from war, which is why, in the modern context, war is often referred to as armed conflict. This can be divided into international armed conflict and armed conflict of a non-international character, usually shortened to non-international armed conflict. As an example of this division, later in that same address, Pope Leo referred to the ending of one international armed conflict, that between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and one ongoing non-international armed conflict, that within Haiti. Conflict, then, exists apart from war. Armed conflict finds its roots in, or is an outgrowth of, previously existing conflicts. In war, one or more than one of the parties to the conflict initiate the use of armed force to resolve that conflict or conflicts. There may be more than one conflict leading to war, which may or may not be related to other previously existing conflicts. This multiplicity of conflicts can make it hard sometimes to determine what the root causes of the war are, but they are rooted in previously existing conflicts. Pope Leo exhorts us to reject war as a means of resolving these conflicts. But sometimes, justice requires war. In episodes 13 and 14, I introduced the continuing relevance of the just war theory. According to that theory, war can only be considered just if it is a last resort. That is, if other means to resolve the conflict fail. Therefore, necessary rejection of war as a means to resolve conflicts must still be open to accept, although reluctantly, the requirement for war when options short of war fail. Of course, using armed force in response to an ongoing armed attack is always permissible, the leaders of the attacked state exercising, as Pope Leo refers, their responsibility for the consequences of war on the lives of their people. As I have said in previous episodes, ending war must be as deliberate as initiating war. Ceasefires and even comprehensive peace agreements may stop the fighting, which is good. However, unless that peace agreement resolves the conflict or conflicts that precipitated the war, that peace will be illusory. Now, this idea presumes that justice is possible in resolving the conflict. What happens, however, if the underlying conflict is itself unjust, leading to an unjust war? How can a ceasefire or peace agreement resolve that conflict? Almost 2 centuries ago, writing in the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars and subsequent wars of liberation, Karl von Clausewitz noted that if one party is forced into a peace agreement that does not grant that party's unjust demands, then it will just defer that conflict to another, more opportune time. Maybe that respite, that brief pause in fighting will be enough, at least for the moment. Maybe, however, deferring that war starting up again will mean that even more people will die later. In that case, The exercise of responsibility for the consequences of their choices, as Pope Leo put it, means that the war must continue until regime change or the people that government allegedly represents is overthrown by those people, who must, of course, support a just resolution to that conflict. But what if the unjust aggressor is too powerful? What if achieving regime change or revolt by the people against unjust leadership is unrealistic? And I'm open to suggestions on that one. I don't have an easy answer. In any case, a line which I cited earlier in this series, written by science fiction philosopher Robert Heinlein, is appropriate. He wrote, "Your enemy is never a villain in his own eyes. Keep this in mind. It may offer a way to make him your friend. If not, you can kill him without hate, and quickly." I humbly offer one modification to that statement. Sometimes, your enemy may genuinely know that he is on the side of evil. Hopefully, that's an exceptionally rare case, but you won't know unless you begin by working on the basis that he is not a minion of the dark. So even when fighting, continue to talk. In any case, peaceful resolution of an ongoing armed conflict must begin by identifying the underlying conflicts that war seeks to resolve, and that may not be an easy thing. Such, however, is the nature of war. War is a human endeavor. As human nature has not changed over the millennia, the causes of war, conflicts between peoples and governments that erupt into armed violence, are also unchanging. Similarly, that unchanging nature of man and warfare teach us that, as German philosopher Immanuel Kant wrote more than 2 centuries ago, ending a war without resolving the underlying conflicts only lays the seeds for future war. Pope Leo maintains, as did his predecessor St. Pope John Paul the Great, that we must reject war as a means of resolving conflict. This is admirable and always to be hoped for and diligently pursued. Mankind's fallen nature, however, teaches us that, as much as we should aspire to resolve conflicts without war, we must also be prepared to fight and win wars in ways that minimize the consequences of bad choices made by those who initiate unjust war. By the time you listen to this, President Trump and President Putin will have met to discuss peace in Ukraine. The next episode of The Ancient Art of Modern Warfare will address the underlying conflict that led to this current armed conflict and whether a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine can hope to secure peace. In closing, it occurs to me that inviting Vladimir Putin to negotiate his invasion of Ukraine and Alaska may not have been the best idea. It may just remind Putin that Alaska was also part of the Russian Empire until 1863, and he may decide to reclaim that for Russia too.